end. And the doctors and nurses kind of try to, go away from the situation unless they have a particular bond with that particular patient, and to make that a private family time. And so with that change, I've seen a corresponding change in the reports I get, whereas mostly in the 70s and early 80s, it was most of these things I heard from physicians and nurses. Now I'm hearing just a tidal wave of these shared death experiences from family members who are there when their loved ones pass away. Most interestingly to me of all KG, and really very difficult to understand, I think, is that every single element that we know of as a near-death experience also occurs often to the bystanders at the bedside of dying loved ones. And the bystanders will talk about, as I said, the seeing the dying patient leave the body, or experience the room fill up with this light of love and compassion. We often hear about music. The bystanders will hear just beautiful heavenly music. And most remarkably of all in that regard, I have quite a number of cases of people who tell me that as their loved ones passed away, one of the bystanders themselves would actually co-live this life review of the dying person. And
well, talk a little bit more about that. Is that a painful experience you were talking about, that they actually experience the other person? So what happens out of that? I mean, what kind of, is there a shift in consciousness? Is there something that they're learning from that review?
Well, that would be my first reaction, that to me this would be very embarrassing, right? But no, to the contrary, every body that I have talked with who've had this particular element of this say that to the contrary, this is a very wonderful thing. Actually, about, I don't know. I mean, you'll learn at age 66 that years go by so fast. But I guess it must have been now, 15 or more years ago. I heard 2 cases of this from women who were in their 40s, both of whom had lost teenage sons and were there at the death of their teenage sons. And as their sons died, saw this holographic panorama consisting of everything their sons had ever done, and felt in communion with their sons during this process. And no, to the contrary of what you would think, that it would be a painful thing, it's the reverse. But the most touching one of these that I heard from was a woman I knew about 20 plus years ago in Carrollton, Georgia, who had one of these relationships that the Greeks had a nice word for it, Sturge love. We all know the allegedly 3 types of Greek love. They had 3 words where we have 1. They had eros, referring to sexual love, and philios, meaning the love of friendship, for example. And then the agape love, which is the total selfless love of another. But the Greeks actually had a 4th kind of love, and I've always wondered why this is not so well circulated, perhaps because it's increasingly rare in our society, but they talked of Sturge love, and this is the kind of love that they had observed in a small farming community or whatever, that a boy and a girl would grow up as playmates and living on adjoining farms and so on, and then in the course of their life would just sort of gradually develop into a marriage. And I've always found this a very interesting type of love, because I had 2 great aunts, my grandfather Moody's sisters, who had that sort of Sturge marriage with the 2 boys who lived on the adjacent farm, and grew up and got married. And this woman I met in Carrollton these many years ago had that sort of relationship with her husband. They had grown up literally as neighbors in the same little community, and then in high school when they started dating, they didn't really think of dating each other, but they had dates with other people and so on. And then during their senior year in high school, which at that time was the 11th grade, actually the 12th grade is a sort of recent innovation, but when they were in the 11th grade, they had decided, well, you know, this is the match that's right. So they decided to get married, and in the process of this, they were waiting for high school graduation and so on, but she became pregnant, and so this was back in the era where this would have been, a scandal, as you know from being in a small town in North Carolina. You can understand. And in that era, this was just something regarded as utterly scandalous. So, but they had a sort of sense of humor about it, and they were kind of putting their strategy together, like how they were going to tell their parents and so on. But in this process, she had a spontaneous miscarriage and lost the baby, and the local physician was very helpful to them and kind in this situation. But then anyway, that following summer, they went ahead and got married and lived a several decades-long marriage. But throughout that time, they never she was never able to get pregnant again. So they ended up not having a child. But throughout their marriage, they used to talk about the child they lost, and they talked about it as though it were a boy, and sort of constantly referred to it as he. And on her husband's deathbed, he developed, I don't remember exactly what kind, but as I remember, a very quickly advancing cancer, and died fairly soon after the diagnosis. But she was there with him at his death, and she said, as he was in the dying process, this panorama just sprang up around them, and it consisted of everything that he had ever done, but she could see her parts there in it too. And she said that they were there in the presence of this complete love that was there with them, and that she said very clearly she was carrying on a conversation with her husband, that he was plainly seeing the same scenes that she was seeing. And also, as she told me, I remember the puzzled look on her face in describing this, she said that there were like panels or screens or certain areas of her husband that were blocked off, and she said that this presence of light there assured her that no, this was not anything bad or any dark secrets or anything, but that eventually she would know these things too, but that for some reason she did not understand, that that it just wasn't the time at that point. And but she said, in describing this, and again, as people say, there are no words that you can use, since everything is going on at once, and yet to relate it, you have to describe it as though it were a sequence. But she said, from this area of this panorama that had to do with their loss of their baby, this being came forward and identified herself as not their son, but their daughter that they had lost. And there was this very, very significant reunion with this child that they had lost in this. So, and I'm telling this story at length to say that as anomalous and odd as that may seem, the people who describe this say that not at all is it anything unpleasant or embarrassing, but rather that it's a perfectly natural occurrence. I have a feeling that these are a lot more common than we might expect. Over the years, I had sort of come to think that this must be a very rare element of a shared death experience, but I think now not, because I was, for example, I was recently, there was a crew of journalists here recently interviewing me, and so I was telling this, this particular aspect, and then I saw one of the camera crew people, or one of the crew people, just suddenly light up with this amazing look on her face, and said that, to her astonishment, that some friend of hers had just recently described that very thing to her, of being there in the ambulance, and it's, to the best of my recollection, with her father, who was dying and had this experience. So I think that that cases of this are going to come to light. I not to plug a book, but this is in my new book, which has just come out with guideposts, called Glimpses of Eternity. I describe this in some detail, and I think that it's once people are given the permission to talk about this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the very nice young journalist that I was talking with just a few days ago had been given my book just on a sort of random assignment, apparently, to review, and she was talking with me through the interview and asking these questions, and then toward the end of the interview she said, well, I just found your book very interesting, because she said this very thing had happened to her, of this empathic death experience at the death of her father, I think it was. And she said that she knew full well that it had happened, and it would, made a very powerful impact on her, but she had no name to put to it. So there's no doubt in my mind that once this gets out into the public, then people will come forward, because I think especially now with this change of the hospital practice we're seeing, I can pretty much guarantee you that there's a tidal wave of these empathic or shared death experiences out there that people have had.
Well, do you think, I think it would change everything if people knew there was life after this life. I think that what you're talking about, people wouldn't get so caught up in this, us and them, and there's more, because what you're talking about with this life review, it feels very completing. It feels like seeing the whole picture. It feels very cleansing, like it would really put you in the love and the compassion, and that's really what is always working. That's always what's behind everything. And if we could know that, because that's, I think, why we don't experience, I think we could have heaven on earth if we had if we were in the right state of consciousness, the right state of...
I do hope that you are right.
We have so many wonderful, beautiful, amazing, and it's just what we choose. It's what we choose. We have to realize we're not victims. It's the power of choice, what we experience.
I really do hope that what you're saying is true, that it would bring about some big change in the way we treat each other. Because, KG, I do feel that we are right